The icy waters of the Platte River swelled with the fury of spring meltwater as Cassandra Blackett clutched desperately to a floating piece of wagon debris, her body numb from the cold and her strength fading with each passing second. The year was 1876, and what had begun as a journey west toward a new teaching position in Wyoming territory was now a struggle for survival as the stagecoach crossing had gone catastrophically wrong. "Help!" she called out, her voice barely carrying over the roar of the rushing water. The other passengers and driver had managed to reach the shore, but the current had swept Cassandra downstream before anyone could reach her. Her vision blurred as the frigid water seeped into her bones, and she felt her grip on the wooden plank weakening. Just as her fingers began to slip, the sound of thundering hooves and shouts broke through her fading consciousness. Through water-logged eyelashes, she glimpsed two small figures on horseback alongside a taller one, and then strong arms were pulling her from the river's deadly embrace. "I've got you, miss," a deep voice assured as she was lifted onto solid ground. "Boys, bring the blankets from the saddlebags, quick now." Cassandra coughed up river water, shivering uncontrollably as her savior knelt beside her. When she finally managed to open her eyes fully, she found herself looking into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a weathered but handsome face framed by sandy brown hair. "Thank you," she managed to whisper through chattering teeth. "Pa, we brought the blankets." Two young voices called in unison, and Cassandra turned to see a pair of identical boys, no more than 8 years old, rushing toward them with woolen blankets clutched in their small hands. "Good work, Matthew, Mark," the man said, taking the blankets and wrapping them tightly around Cassandra's trembling form. "Madam, I'm Ethan Miller. These are my sons. We need to get you warmed up before the chill takes you. Our ranch is just over that ridge." Cassandra nodded weakly as Ethan lifted her onto his horse, mounting behind her and holding her securely against his chest. The warmth of him seeped through the blankets, a stark contrast to the river's icy grip. As they rode, the twins flanked them on their ponies, occasionally glancing up with identical expressions of concern on their freckled faces. "The boys spotted you from the ridge," Ethan explained, his breath warm against her ear. "They've got eagle eyes, those two. Lucky thing we were heading back from town." "Lucky indeed," Cassandra murmured, feeling strength gradually returning to her limbs as they crested a hill and a modest ranch came into view. A small but sturdy log cabin stood surrounded by a barn, corral, and various outbuildings, with rolling pasture land stretching beyond. "Welcome to Miller Ranch, miss." Ethan trailed off questioningly. "Blackett, Cassandra Blackett," she replied, her voice steadier now. "I was on my way to Cedar Creek to take up a teaching position." Ethan's eyebrows raised slightly. "Cedar Creek, that's just 15 miles west of here. Seems fate has put you in the right direction at least." As they approached the cabin, the twins raced ahead, dismounting with surprising agility for children so young and rushing to open the door. "Pa's bringing a lady," Matthew, or was it Mark, announced to the empty house as they entered. "She fell in the river and we saved her." The other twin added proudly. "You both did real good," Ethan affirmed as he carried Cassandra over the threshold. The interior of the cabin was simple but homey. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking area nearby. A dining table and chairs sat in the center of the main room, while a curtained-off area presumably led to sleeping quarters. Ethan set Cassandra down gently in a rocking chair near the fireplace, where embers still glowed. "Mark, build up that fire." "Matthew, fetch one of my clean shirts and a pair of trousers for Miss Blackett to change into." The boys rushed to their tasks with enthusiasm as Ethan stoked the fire, adding kindling and logs until flames leaped to life. The warmth began to penetrate Cassandra's sodden clothing, but she knew she needed to get out of her wet garments before she caught her death. "The boys and I will give you privacy to change," Ethan said, seeming to read her thoughts. "There's a screen in the corner you can use. I'll heat some broth." As the Miller men busied themselves in the kitchen area, Cassandra made her way behind the folding screen with the dry clothes Matthew had brought. She peeled off her soaked dress, petticoats, and undergarments, wringing them out as best she could before donning Ethan's oversized shirt and trousers, which she cinched with a length of rope he'd thoughtfully included. When she emerged, her wet clothes draped over one arm, she found the twins watching her with undisguised curiosity. "You look like Pa now," one of them, Mark, she thought, observed with a giggle. "But prettier," Matthew added, earning a gentle cuff on the ear from his father. "Mind your manners, son," Ethan said, though his eyes crinkled with amusement. He took Cassandra's wet clothes and hung them on a line near the fire. "Sit and have some broth. It'll warm you from the inside." Cassandra accepted the steaming mug gratefully, sipping the rich liquid and feeling life flow back into her limbs. "I cannot thank you all enough," she said. "You saved my life. We saw you in the water," one of the twins exclaimed. "Pa was going to ride on by, but we made him stop." "Matthew," Ethan warned, but there was no real rebuke in his tone. "Is that true?" Cassandra asked, looking at Ethan with new interest. The rancher rubbed the back of his neck, a flush creeping up his tanned face. "The boys exaggerate. I was scouting for strays, and they were supposed to be keeping an eye out for cattle markings. Instead, they spotted you." "We're good at spotting things," Mark declared proudly. "Last week I found a rabbit nest that even Pa walked right past." "And I found Pa's wedding ring when he dropped it in the hay," Matthew added. An uncomfortable silence fell at the mention of the ring. Ethan's expression tightened momentarily before he forced a smile. "Boys, why don't you go check on the horses, make sure they're properly cooled down and watered?" The twins exchanged glances but did as they were told, filing out the door with only a slight drag in their steps. When they were gone, Cassandra ventured carefully, "Your wife?" "Gone 3 years now," Ethan replied, his voice level but carrying an undercurrent of old pain. "Fever took her after a harsh winter." "I'm so sorry," Cassandra said sincerely. "Your boys are wonderful. You've done an admirable job raising them alone." Ethan's features softened as he looked toward the door where the twins had exited. "They make it easy to keep going. Though I confess, being both mother and father to them is no simple task." He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the personal turn of the conversation. "What about you, Miss Blackett? What brings a lady like yourself to Wyoming territory alone?" Cassandra cradled the warm mug between her hands. "I was a teacher back in Boston, but after my parents passed last year, there was little keeping me there. When I saw the advertisement for a school teacher needed in Cedar Creek, it seemed like Providence." "Cedar Creek's growing fast," Ethan acknowledged. "The railroad's coming through next year and families are settling ahead of it. They'll be glad to have a proper teacher." "If I ever arrive," Cassandra said with a rueful smile, "all my belongings were on that stagecoach. I'm not even sure what happened to the other passengers." "We'll ride to the crossing tomorrow," Ethan assured her. "The stage stop is there. Your things may have been recovered." "And if not," Ethan regarded her steadily, "then we'll figure something out. Wyoming folk look after their own, even the newly arrived ones." The twins burst back in, bringing a gust of fresh air and boundless energy with them. "Pa, Rusty's got a loose shoe, and we're hungry." The domestic scene that followed warmed Cassandra as much as the fire. Ethan moved efficiently around the kitchen, preparing a simple but hearty meal of beans, cornbread, and salt pork. The twins set the table without being asked, though they bickered constantly about who would place what where. "Miss Blackett can sit in Ma's chair," Matthew suggested. Mark frowned. "But that's Pa's special chair now. No one sits there." Ethan interrupted smoothly. "Miss Blackett can sit where I usually do. I'll take the bench." Throughout the meal, Cassandra found herself increasingly charmed by the Miller family. The twins peppered her with questions about Boston, school, and whether she knew how to ride a horse or shoot a gun. "Matthew, Mark," Ethan admonished after a particularly bold inquiry about whether she had a beau waiting back east. "Miss Blackett is our guest, not a subject for your interrogation." "It's quite all right," Cassandra laughed. "And no, there's no beau. I was engaged once, but he—" She hesitated, the old hurt surfacing briefly. "He found someone with better prospects." Ethan's gaze met hers across the table, a flash of understanding passing between them. "His loss," he said simply, and the genuine warmth in his voice made her cheeks heat unexpectedly. After dinner, the challenge of sleeping arrangements arose. The cabin had 2 bedrooms, Ethan's, and one shared by the twins. "You'll take my room," Ethan said firmly when Cassandra protested. "I'll bunk with the boys. But where will you sleep? Those beds are small for a man your size." Ethan's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I've slept on the ground under the stars more nights than I can count, Miss Blackett. A floor with a roof over my head is luxury by comparison." That night, lying in Ethan Miller's bed, surrounded by the scent of his saddle leather, pine, and something indefinably masculine, Cassandra found herself thinking about the twist of fate that had brought her here. The river that nearly claimed her life had also delivered her to this small family that already intrigued her more than anyone she'd met in years. She awoke to the sound of childish whispers and the sensation of being watched. Opening her eyes, she found 2 identical faces peering at her from the bedside, their blue eyes so like their father's, wide with curiosity. "Are you awake?" one whispered loudly. "She is now, dummy," the other replied, elbowing his brother. Cassandra sat up, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. "Good morning, boys." "Pa's making flapjacks," Matthew announced. "He only makes them on special days." "Is today special?" she asked, running a hand through her tangled hair. The twins looked at each other, communicating in that mysterious way that only twins can. "Pa said you're special," Mark finally replied with childish directness. "He told us to be on our best behavior." Before Cassandra could respond to this unexpected revelation, Ethan's voice called from the main room. "Boys, leave Miss Blackett in peace and come set the table." Breakfast was indeed flapjacks, served with molasses and strong coffee. Ethan seemed slightly embarrassed by his son's earlier pronouncement, but didn't deny it. Instead, he outlined the day's plan. "We'll ride to the stage stop first, see about your belongings. The station master there will know what happened to the other passengers." "I can't impose on you further," Cassandra protested. "You've already done so much." "It's no imposition," Ethan insisted. "Besides, the boys and I need supplies from town anyway." An hour later, Cassandra found herself seated side-saddle on a gentle mare named Daisy, her now dry dress back on, but still wearing Ethan's wool coat for warmth. The twins rode ahead on their ponies, occasionally racing each other and whooping with delight. "They're so full of life," Cassandra observed as she rode beside Ethan. "Too full sometimes," he replied with a rueful chuckle. "Teaching them has been challenging. We do our lessons at night, but I'm not much of a schoolmaster. I suspect they'll benefit greatly from proper teaching in Cedar Creek." "How far is it to the school from your ranch?" "About an hour's ride. Too far for them to go daily once winter sets in." "What will you do then?" Ethan's expression grew thoughtful. "Been considering building a place in town for the winter months. The boys need education more than I need my solitude." The stage stop was a hive of activity when they arrived. A crowd had gathered, and the station master looked harried as he directed men in the recovery of what appeared to be luggage from the river. "Mr. Miller," the station master called when he spotted them. "Heard there was trouble at the crossing yesterday. These yours?" He gestured to several trunks and bags lined up near the building. "Actually, they might be Miss Blackett's," Ethan replied, helping Cassandra dismount. "She was on the stage that went into the river." The station master's eyes widened. "Miss Blackett, the new schoolteacher." "Madam, we feared the worst when the driver reported a passenger missing. The whole town's been in an uproar. The Miller family rescued me," Cassandra explained, overwhelmed by the concern. "Mr. Miller and his sons pulled me from the river." "Those twins spotted her," Ethan corrected, giving credit where it was due. The boys swelled with pride at their father's acknowledgement. With the station master's help, they located Cassandra's trunk and carpet bag, miraculously intact though somewhat water-damaged. The other passengers, she learned, had all made it safely to Cedar Creek, where news of her apparent drowning had already spread. "We should get you to Cedar Creek right away," the station master urged. "Mrs. Peterson, she's head of the school board, she's beside herself. Already talking about sending for another teacher from back east." "I can take her," Ethan volunteered. "We're headed that direction anyway." The road to Cedar Creek wound through stunning Wyoming landscape, vast grasslands ringed by distant mountains, the late spring sunshine gilding everything in warm light. Cassandra's trunk was securely strapped to a packhorse, and the twins had calmed somewhat, riding more sedately as they approached the town. "Are you anxious to start your new life?" Ethan asked as Cedar Creek's buildings came into view. Cassandra considered the question. Yesterday, the answer would have been an unequivocal yes. Now, after just one night in the company of this small, loving family, she felt a curious reluctance. "I am eager to teach again," she said carefully, "though I find myself surprisingly sorry to leave the company of you and your sons so soon." Ethan's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Cedar Creek's not so far that we couldn't visit. The boys would like that, I think." "Just the boys." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Ethan's gaze held hers for a long moment. "No, Miss Blackett, not just the boys." Cedar Creek proved to be a bustling frontier town, with a main street lined by false-fronted buildings, a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and at the far end, a white clapboard church, and beside it, a newly constructed schoolhouse. Their arrival caused quite a stir. People emerged from shops and homes to stare at the presumed dead schoolteacher riding into town accompanied by the widower rancher and his twin sons. By the time they reached the schoolhouse, a small crowd had gathered, including a stout woman in a severe dark dress who rushed forward. "Miss Blackett, oh my heavens, we thought we'd lost you before we'd even met you." The woman clasped Cassandra's hands as Ethan helped her dismount. "I'm Harriet Peterson, head of the school board, when we heard about the accident. Mrs. Peterson, I'm perfectly fine, thanks to Mr. Miller and his sons," Cassandra assured her, nodding toward Ethan and the twins, who hung back shyly under the town's scrutiny. Mrs. Peterson turned to Ethan with newfound respect. "Mr. Miller, how can we ever thank you? You've saved our school year." Ethan shifted uncomfortably at the attention. "Anyone would have done the same, madam. Nonsense, you're a hero, you and those fine boys of yours." Mrs. Peterson beamed at the twins, who straightened proudly. "Now, Miss Blackett, we have the teachers' quarters all prepared for you. It's attached right to the back of the schoolhouse. Simple but comfortable. School starts in 3 days, which should give you time to settle in." As arrangements were made to transport Cassandra's belongings to her new home, she found herself repeatedly looking back at Ethan and the twins, who were preparing to depart. A sense of loss washed over her at the thought of them riding away, breaking away from Mrs. Peterson. Mid-sentence, Cassandra hurried over to where Ethan was adjusting his saddle. "Mr. Miller," she began, suddenly uncertain what to say. He turned, his expression softening when he met her eyes. "Miss Blackett, I want to thank you properly. You and the boys, I owe you my life." Ethan shook his head. "No thanks needed." "Nevertheless," she persisted, "perhaps you could bring the twins to visit on Sunday. I would love to show them the schoolhouse, and maybe you could stay for dinner. I'm told my quarters have a small kitchen." Was that hope she saw flicker in his eyes? "That would be fine," he said with careful restraint, though the twins made no effort to hide their excitement, bouncing in their saddles. "Can we, Pa, can we?" they chorused. "If Miss Blackett is inviting us, it would be impolite to refuse," Ethan replied gravely, though his eyes held a warmth that made Cassandra's heart flutter. With promises to return Sunday, the Millers departed, the twins waving enthusiastically until they were out of sight. Cassandra watched them go, a curious ache in her chest that had nothing to do with her near-drowning experience. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Cassandra settled into her modest quarters, met town residents, organized the schoolroom, and prepared for her first day of teaching. Yet through it all, her thoughts frequently strayed to the Miller Ranch and its inhabitants. Sunday couldn't come quickly enough. She rose early, cleaned her already tidy quarters, and prepared a hearty stew that could simmer while she showed the twins around the schoolhouse. She had just changed into her best dress, a deep blue that matched her eyes, when she heard the sound of horses and childish voices outside. Her heart leaped as she opened the door to find Ethan and the twins dismounting, looking freshly scrubbed and wearing their Sunday best. Ethan had even trimmed his beard, and his hair was neatly combed, though a rebellious lock fell across his forehead in a way that made him look boyishly handsome. "Miss Blackett!" the twins cried in unison, rushing forward with a small, clumsily wrapped package. "We brought you a present." Cassandra knelt to accept it, carefully unwrapping the brown paper to reveal a smooth, heart-shaped stone painted with colorful stripes and dots. "Mark found the rock," Matthew explained earnestly, "and I painted it," Mark added. "Pa helped a little with the holding steady part." "It's beautiful," Cassandra said sincerely, touched by the simple gift. "I shall treasure it always." Looking up, she found Ethan watching the exchange with gentle eyes. He too held a package, wrapped more neatly. "The boys insisted we couldn't come empty-handed," he said, extending it to her. "It's nothing fancy." Inside was a small leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with delicate flowers. "For your teaching notes," Ethan explained, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice, "or whatever thoughts you might want to put down." The thoughtfulness of the gift nearly brought tears to Cassandra's eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Thank you." The tour of the schoolhouse delighted the twins, who ran from desk to desk, arguing over where they would sit when winter came and they joined the school. "I want to sit by the window," Matthew insisted. "No, I called it first," Mark countered. "Boys!" Ethan's gentle rebuke was enough to settle them, though they continued to whisper their preferences to each other. Cassandra showed them the books, slates, and maps that would be used in lessons. "You'll be ahead of the other students if you've already been studying at home," she encouraged. "Pa teaches us sums," Matthew volunteered, "and reading from the Bible." "And horse doctoring," Mark added importantly. "I can tell when a hoof needs trimming just by the way a horse walks." "Valuable skills indeed," Cassandra acknowledged with a smile. "But there's much more to learn: history, geography, science." Ethan, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "The boys' education means everything to me. Their mother would have wanted them to have every advantage, even out here." The mention of the twins' mother brought a momentary solemnity to the room. Cassandra guided them back to her quarters, where the aroma of the stew she'd prepared filled the small space. Dinner was a lively affair, with the twins regaling her with tales of ranch life and their various adventures. Ethan spoke less but watched Cassandra with increasing warmth as she engaged wholeheartedly with his sons, answering their questions and posing thoughtful ones of her own. As they finished the apple cobbler Cassandra had baked for dessert, Matthew asked innocently, "Miss Blackett, will you come visit us at the ranch sometime? Pa makes really good beans, but yours taste better." Ethan choked slightly on his coffee. "Matthew, that's not, I'd love to visit," Cassandra interjected, smiling at the boy's candor. "If your father approves, of course." All eyes turned to Ethan, who cleared his throat. "You're welcome anytime, Miss Blackett." The invitation, simple as it was, felt significant. As the Millers prepared to leave, Cassandra found herself reluctant to see them go. Standing in her doorway, she watched as Ethan helped the twins mount their ponies. Before mounting his own horse, he turned back to her. "The boys have school tomorrow, and you have teaching to do, but perhaps next Sunday, if you're not otherwise engaged, you might join us at the ranch. I could send the wagon for you." "I would like that very much," Cassandra replied, unable to hide her pleasure at the invitation. Ethan's smile transformed his face, erasing years of worry and loneliness. "Until then, Miss Blackett," "Cassandra," she corrected gently. "I think we've moved beyond formalities, don't you, Mr. Miller?" "Ethan," he returned, his voice warm. "Definitely Ethan." The next week passed in a blur of new faces and names as Cassandra began teaching the children of Cedar Creek. Her class numbered 22 students of varying ages and abilities, from 6-year-olds learning their letters to teenagers studying advanced arithmetic. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying, and she quickly earned the respect of both students and parents with her fair, patient approach. Yet throughout the busy days, her thoughts often drifted to the Miller Ranch and its inhabitants. She found herself wondering what Ethan and the twins were doing, whether they were working the cattle, fixing fences, or gathered around their table for meals. The simple stone the boys had given her sat on her desk, a colorful reminder of their generosity. By Sunday morning, anticipation had built to such a degree that Cassandra was ready an hour before the wagon was due to arrive. She had baked a berry pie and wrapped it carefully, hoping it would survive the journey. When she heard the rumble of wagon wheels outside, her heart quickened. To her surprise, it was Ethan himself who had come, not a hired hand as she'd expected. He wore a clean shirt and his best trousers, his hat set at a rakish angle that made him look younger and more carefree than she'd seen him before. "The boys wanted to come along," he explained as he helped her into the wagon, "but I set them to cleaning the house instead. Figured you might enjoy a peaceful ride after a week of teaching." The thoughtfulness of this gesture touched her deeply. The hour-long journey passed quickly as they talked easily about her first week of teaching, his ranching challenges, and the twins' latest escapades. "They've been counting the days until your visit," Ethan admitted. "Mark even insisted on picking wildflowers for the table this morning. And you." "Have you been counting days as well?" Cassandra ventured, feeling bold in the spring sunshine. Ethan's gaze met hers briefly before returning to the road. "Every single one," he acknowledged softly. The Miller Ranch looked different in full daylight than it had on the evening of her rescue. The log cabin, while modest, was well maintained, with cheerful curtains in the windows and a small garden plot to one side. The surrounding landscape was breathtaking rolling grasslands stretching to distant mountains, a small creek winding through a stand of cottonwoods, and cattle grazing peacefully on the hillsides. The twins burst from the cabin as the wagon approached, racing to greet them with excited shouts. They had clearly taken their cleaning duties seriously, as their faces were freshly scrubbed and their hair slicked down with water. "Miss Blackett, we cleaned everything, even under the beds," Matthew announced proudly. "Pa made us," Mark added with a grin, "but we would have done it anyway 'cause you're coming." The day that followed was one of the most pleasant Cassandra had ever experienced. The boys showed her around the ranch, the barn with its horses and milk cow, the chicken coop, the vegetable garden they helped tend. Ethan gave her a tour of the house, which was indeed spotless, though he apologized for its simplicity. "It's not what you'd be used to back east," he said, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice. "It's a home," Cassandra replied sincerely. "A real home filled with love. That's worth more than any fancy parlor or crystal chandelier." After a hearty midday meal, they all walked down to the creek, where the twins showed off their fishing skills while Cassandra and Ethan sat on the bank, talking quietly as the afternoon sun warmed them. "How did you end up ranching in Wyoming?" she asked, genuinely curious about the path that had led him here. Ethan leaned back on his elbows, squinting slightly in the sunlight. "Came west from Pennsylvania after the war, fought for the Union, saw too much death, wanted open spaces and clean air afterward. Worked cattle drives for years, saved every penny. Met Sarah, the boy's mother, in Cheyenne. She was a shopkeeper's daughter with a wild streak who wanted adventure more than city life." His expression softened at the memory. "We built this place together, had the boys. She died when they were 5, pneumonia after a harsh winter." "I'm so sorry," Cassandra said softly, understanding now the shadows that sometimes crossed his face. "It was hard," Ethan acknowledged. "Still is sometimes, but the boys needed me to keep going." He glanced at the twins, who were arguing good-naturedly over who had the better fishing spot. "What about you? Teaching seems a calling for you, not just employment." Cassandra smiled, appreciating his perception. "It is. My father was a professor, my mother a governess before they married. Books and learning were everything in our home. When they passed, influenza took them both within days of each other. Teaching was the only path that made sense. Boston held too many memories, so when I saw the advertisement for Cedar Creek—" "Fate," Ethan murmured. "Pardon." "Fate," he repeated more firmly. "That you'd see that particular advertisement, take that particular stage, fall into that particular river at that particular moment when 2 sharp-eyed boys happened to be riding by." The significance of his words hung in the air between them. Cassandra felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the sunshine spreading through her chest. Before she could respond, however, the twins came running up, proudly displaying the 3 small fish they'd caught. "Pa, Miss Blackett, look what we caught. Can we have them for supper?" The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of the invisible thread that seemed to be binding their lives together. The pattern was set in the weeks that followed. Cassandra taught during the week, and on Sundays, either Ethan would bring the wagon to take her to the ranch, or she would host the Miller family at her quarters behind the schoolhouse. The twins flourished under her gentle guidance, bringing her wildflowers, interesting rocks, or tales of ranch life whenever they visited. As for Ethan and Cassandra, their friendship deepened with each meeting. They discovered shared interests in books, similar views on child rearing, and complementary senses of humor. She admired his integrity, his devotion to his sons, and his quiet strength. He respected her intelligence, her patience with the twins, and her courage in starting a new life so far from everything familiar. The townsfolk noticed, of course. Cedar Creek was too small for such regular visits to go unremarked. Mrs. Peterson, ever the guardian of propriety, pulled Cassandra aside after church one Sunday in early June. "Miss Blackett, while we all appreciate what the Miller family did for you, and no one can deny Ethan Miller is a fine, upstanding man. Well, there are those who think perhaps your association with an unmarried gentleman is becoming noteworthy." Cassandra felt her cheeks flush, partly with embarrassment and partly with indignation. "Mr. Miller and his sons have shown me nothing but kindness and respect, Mrs. Peterson. I assure you everything has been entirely proper." "Of course, dear, of course," Mrs. Peterson soothed. "No one is suggesting otherwise. It's just that, as our school teacher, you understand your position in the community carries certain expectations." The conversation left Cassandra unsettled. Not because she felt she had done anything wrong, but because it forced her to confront the nature of her feelings for Ethan, feelings that had grown far beyond gratitude or simple friendship. That afternoon, when Ethan arrived to take her back to the ranch, she was uncharacteristically quiet. The twins had stayed home with a neighbor's daughter watching them, giving Ethan and Cassandra a rare moment alone. "Something troubling you?" he asked as they left the town behind. Cassandra hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "Mrs. Peterson suggested that our friendship is causing talk in town." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I see, and does that concern you? What others might think?" "Not for myself," she replied carefully. "But as the school teacher, I have a position to maintain, and you, with your boys, I wouldn't want anything to reflect poorly on you." Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop in the middle of the empty road, turning to face her directly. "Cassandra, I need to ask you something, and I'd appreciate your honest answer." Her heart began to beat faster at the seriousness in his tone. "Of course. These past weeks, spending time together, has it just been gratitude on your part for the river rescue?" The directness of the question took her breath away. "No," she whispered. "No, Ethan, it's been far more than gratitude for quite some time now." Relief washed over his features. "Good," he said simply, "because I've been falling in love with you since the moment you opened your eyes on that riverbank." The confession, so plainly stated, filled Cassandra with joy. "Ethan, I know it's soon," he continued, words tumbling out as if he'd held them back too long. "And I know you have your teaching, and the boys are still young, and there's my ranch to consider. But when I think about my future, our future, I can't imagine it without you in it." Tears filled Cassandra's eyes. "I feel the same way. I've tried to tell myself it's too soon, that I barely know you, but my heart doesn't seem to care about those arguments." Ethan reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I'm not asking for an answer today, just wanted you to know where I stand. As for the town gossips, let them talk. Nothing improper has happened, and nothing will unless we decide otherwise," Cassandra finished for him, squeezing his hand. The weeks of early summer passed in a golden haze of deepening affection. School let out for the harvest season, giving Cassandra more time to visit the ranch. She taught the twins to read from books beyond the Bible, introduced them to world geography through maps she borrowed from the schoolhouse, and helped tend the vegetable garden, learning from Ethan the particular challenges of growing food in Wyoming's climate. In return, Ethan taught her to ride properly, not side saddle but astride like a ranch woman. The twins showed her how to collect eggs without upsetting the hens, and took immense pride in teaching her the names and personalities of every horse and cow on the property. It was on a warm July evening, as they sat on the porch watching the twins chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, that Ethan finally asked the question that had been building between them. "Cassandra," he began, his voice husky with emotion, "I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that caught the last rays of sunlight, a gold ring, simple but elegant. "This was Sarah's, the one Matthew found when I dropped it in the hay last year." Cassandra's breath caught as she realized what was happening. "I've kept it safe, waiting for the day it felt right to use it again," Ethan continued. "The boys adore you, I think you know that, and well, I love you more than I have words to express. Would you consider becoming my wife, being a mother to Matthew and Mark, making this ranch your home?" Tears filled Cassandra's eyes as she looked at the man before her, this strong, gentle soul who had saved her from the river and, in the process, saved her from a life without the deep love she now felt. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Ethan Miller, I will marry you." The twins, who had been suspiciously quiet during this exchange, suddenly erupted in cheers from where they had been eavesdropping near the porch steps. "She said yes, Pa, she said yes." Laughing through her tears, Cassandra opened her arms as the boys rushed to hug her. "Does this mean we can call you Ma now?" Mark asked hopefully. "If you'd like to," Cassandra replied, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "We've been practicing," Matthew admitted, "when Pa wasn't listening." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for their first real kiss, tender, sweet, and full of promise. The twins made exaggerated gagging noises, then dissolved into giggles when their father shot them a mock stern look. "Boys, why don't you go inside and get the special pie we baked this morning? Seems we have something to celebrate." As the twins raced off, Ethan held Cassandra close, his forehead resting against hers. "You've saved us, you know," he murmured. "Me and the boys. We were surviving, but not really living, not until you came." "And you saved me," she replied softly, "not just from the river, but from a life half lived. I think perhaps we saved each other." The wedding took place in September, after the summer harvest but before the winter snows. The entire town of Cedar Creek turned out for the occasion, even Mrs. Peterson, who had softened considerably toward the match once it was properly sanctioned by engagement. The ceremony, held in the white clapboard church, was simple but meaningful. The twins served as their father's best men, solemnly carrying the rings on a small velvet pillow they had saved up to buy especially for the occasion. Cassandra wore a new dress of cream-colored silk that Ethan had ordered all the way from Denver, with wildflowers in her hair that the twins had gathered that morning. When they spoke their vows, Ethan's voice was steady and sure, his eyes never leaving hers. Cassandra's heart was so full she could barely speak the words that would bind them together, but somehow she managed, the promise of their future together carrying her through. The reception was held on the grounds of the Miller Ranch, with tables set up under the cottonwood trees and lanterns strung from the branches. Townsfolk and neighboring ranchers brought dishes to share, and there was music from a fiddle and harmonica as the celebration continued into the evening. As twilight fell, Cassandra found herself momentarily alone, watching as Ethan swung a laughing mark in an impromptu dance, while Matthew tried to mimic his father's steps with one of the schoolgirls. The scene before her, this family that was now hers, this land that was now home, filled her with a contentment she had never known possible. "Mrs. Miller," a voice said beside her, and she turned to find Ethan, slightly breathless from dancing, his eyes alight with love. "May I have this dance?" "You may indeed, Mr. Miller," she replied, stepping into his embrace as the musicians began a slow waltz. As they moved together under the stars, Cassandra marveled at the journey that had brought her here. Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if the stage hadn't overturned that day? She asked softly. Ethan's arms tightened around her. I try not to, the thought of never finding you. He shook his head. Let's just be grateful the boys have sharp eyes. And that you listened to them, she added with a smile. Best decision I ever made, he murmured, bending to kiss her as the twins shouted their approval from nearby, causing the wedding guests to laugh and applaud. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the twins had finally succumbed to sleep, exhausted from excitement and dancing, Ethan and Cassandra stood alone on the porch of what was now their home. Happy, Mrs. Miller? Ethan asked, his arm around her waist. Completely, she assured him, leaning into his solid warmth. Though I'm still getting used to the name, you've got time, he teased. A lifetime, in fact, a lifetime. The promise of those words washed over her years ahead with this man who had become her heart's companion, raising the twins together, perhaps adding to their family, watching the seasons change over their land year after year. A lifetime sounds just about right, she whispered, turning in his arms to kiss him under the vast Wyoming sky, stars scattered like diamonds above them, and the distant sound of the river that had nearly taken her life but had instead given her everything murmuring its approval in the darkness. 5 years later, the Miller Ranch had flourished in the 5 years since Cassandra and Ethan had married. The original cabin had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, a daughter, Sarah Elizabeth, now 3, named for both Ethan's first wife and Cassandra's mother, and a 1-year-old son, Daniel James, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's curious nature. The twins, now 13, had shot up like weeds and were proving to be excellent horsemen and capable ranch hands. Under Cassandra's continued guidance, they excelled in their studies as well, with Matthew showing a particular aptitude for mathematics and Mark displaying a talent for writing that surprised everyone, including himself. Cedar Creek had grown too, with the railroad's arrival bringing new businesses and settlers. Cassandra still taught at the schoolhouse, though now only 3 days a week, bringing baby Daniel with her while Sarah stayed with Ethan and the twins on those days, learning ranch life from her father and brothers. On this particular evening, the exact anniversary of the day, Ethan and the twins had pulled Cassandra from the river 6 years before the family gathered on the expanded porch of their home. Cassandra sat in a rocking chair, Daniel sleeping against her shoulder, while Sarah played with wooden animals the twins had carved for her last Christmas. Ethan stood leaning against the porch rail, watching as the setting sun painted the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Beautiful, isn't it? Cassandra remarked, her voice soft so as not to wake the baby. Second most beautiful sight I've ever seen, Ethan replied with a wink. Matthew rolled his eyes dramatically. Pa's being romantic again, he stage whispered to his twin. Disgusting, Mark agreed, though his grin belied his words. Sarah looked up from her toys. What's romantic mean? It means your pa loves your ma so much he says mushy things to make her smile, Matthew explained with the wisdom of his 13 years. Oh, Sarah considered this. I like when mama smiles. Me too, princess, Ethan agreed, ruffling his daughter's dark curls. As the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the eastern sky, Ethan moved to stand behind Cassandra's chair, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Do you know what day it is? He asked softly. Cassandra tilted her head back to look up at him. How could I forget, the day that changed everything? The twins, who had been bickering good-naturedly over whose turn it was to feed the horses in the morning, grew quiet. They too remembered the significance of the date, though the memory had taken on a mythic quality in their young minds the day they had spotted the lady in the river and brought her home to become their new mother. We've never properly thanked that river, Mark mused thoughtfully. Matthew snorted. Thank a river? That's the dumbest, not dumb, Ethan interrupted gently. That river nearly took your mother from us before we even knew her, but in its way it also brought her to us. I reckon there's something poetic in that. Like one of Mark's stories, Matthew conceded, always quick to support his twin when it mattered. Sarah, not to be left out of the conversation, asked, "Can we go see the river tomorrow? The place where you found Mama?" Cassandra and Ethan exchanged glances over the children's heads. They hadn't visited that particular bend in the river since the day of the rescue, though they crossed other sections regularly on their travels to and from town. "I think that's a fine idea," Ethan decided. "We could pack a picnic, make a day of it." "And I still have this," Cassandra added, slipping her free hand into her pocket and withdrawing a small, heart-shaped stone, its painted surface faded but still colorful. "The first gift you boys ever gave me," Mark beamed with pride. "You kept it all this time." "Of course I did. It's one of my most treasured possessions." The following day dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for their pilgrimage to the river. They set out after morning chores, the twins on their own horses now, Sarah riding proudly in front of Ethan, and Cassandra carrying Daniel in a sling across her chest as she rode Daisy, the gentle mare that had been her first mount in Wyoming. When they reached the spot, a wide bend in the river where the current slowed and a gravel bank made access to the water easier, Ethan reined in his horse, his expression growing solemn as he surveyed the peaceful scene. It was higher then, he recalled, his voice distant with memory. Spring runoff. The current was much stronger. The twins dismounted, approaching the water's edge with newfound respect as they realized how dangerous it must have been that day. Sarah, not understanding the gravity of the moment but sensing its importance, clung to her father's hand as he lifted her down. Cassandra stood at the riverbank, Daniel sleeping against her chest, and felt a complex wave of emotions wash over her. Fear, remembering the cold grip of the water and her certainty that she would drown. Gratitude for the sharp eyes of two young boys who had spotted her from a distance. And overwhelming love for the family that had formed from that chance encounter, a family that now defined her existence in ways she could never have imagined. Ethan came to stand beside her, his arm slipping around her waist. "Penny, for your thoughts, Mrs. Miller." "I was thinking about fate," she replied softly. "About how the worst moments of our lives can sometimes lead to the best ones." He nodded, understanding completely as he always did. "I brought something," he said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small box, "a gift to mark the day." Curious, Cassandra opened it to find a gold locket on a delicate chain. When she pressed the tiny clasp, it opened to reveal a miniature painting of the river on one side and their family, all 6 of them, captured by a traveling portrait artist who had passed through Cedar Creek the previous month, on the other. "Ethan, it's beautiful," she breathed, tears springing to her eyes. "To remind you of where our story began," he said, taking the locket and fastening it around her neck, "and where it continues every day." The twins, watching this exchange, exchanged knowing looks. "Still being romantic," Matthew noted, though his tone was affectionate rather than mocking. "Always," Ethan confirmed, pulling Cassandra closer as Sarah tugged at Mark's hand, demanding to be shown exactly where they had found her mother. As the twins led their sister along the riverbank, pointing out the spot and embellishing the tale with increasingly dramatic details, Cassandra leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder. "I love you," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of their shared journey from strangers to rescuer, and rescued to friends to lovers to partners in building a life neither could have envisioned alone. "And I love you," he returned, pressing a kiss to her temple. Every day more than the last, Daniel stirred against Cassandra's chest, blinking up at his parents with sleepy curiosity. Ethan tickled the baby's cheek, eliciting a gummy smile that never failed to melt his heart. "Pa, Ma, look what we found." The twins' excited shouts drew their attention back to the river, where Mark was carefully lifting something from the water's edge, a piece of weathered wood that might once have been part of a wagon wheel or stagecoach frame. "You think it could be from your stagecoach, Ma?" Matthew asked eagerly as they brought their treasure for inspection. Cassandra examined the wood, worn smooth by years in the water. "It very well could be," she agreed, though in truth there was no way to know. "Can we keep it?" Mark asked. "As a reminder, I think that's fitting," Ethan nodded. "We'll find a place for it at home." As they spread their picnic blanket under a cottonwood tree near the river, the family that had been forged from a near tragedy celebrated the life they had built together. Sarah chattered about the fish she could see in the clear shallows. Daniel practiced sitting up with his father's steady hands supporting him, and the twins debated whether the piece of driftwood should be mounted on the barn wall or inside the house. Watching them, Cassandra's hand went to the locket at her throat, feeling its reassuring weight against her skin. The river flowed on, constant yet ever-changing, much like love itself, powerful, sometimes dangerous, but ultimately life-giving and essential. "Thank you," she whispered. Her words meant for the water, for fate, for the sharp-eyed twins, and most of all for the man who had pulled her from the current and into a life richer and more beautiful than any she could have dreamed. Ethan caught her whisper and smiled, understanding without need for explanation. "No, Cassandra," he said softly, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her wedding ring, the same ring that had once been lost and found again, much like the two of them. "Thank you for saying yes to life here, to us, to everything." And in that moment, with the river murmuring nearby and their children's laughter filling the air, Cassandra knew with absolute certainty that some currents, once you surrender to them, carry you exactly where you're meant to be.